To our Voices of Faith in Leadership program for tonight, and our guest tonight, teacher, instructor, guide, prophet, Dr. Professor, as well as many other things at UW. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then take over. We have people on Zoom as well, so don't forget them. On behalf of our people who are on Zoom, if you ask a question, please project your voice.
Like you do.
Like I do. Or I will be repeating it. Hello, our Zoom friends. Hello. All right. Fredrick?
It's good to be here. It's not my first rodeo, but it is hard to be here. I see these folks quite often, and I'm always impressed with not just the attendance and the presence, but this idea of us having dialogue. So for all of you all that we have met before, and for those who are meeting for the very first time, this will be something we can use as a conversation. And the conversation in itself, feel free to stop, let's dissect, dismantle, and feel like we're doing this with family. You know, it's talking about not the best part of the family.
Yeah.
The family that challenges you the most. She's not in this room, so I think we're in good shape, right? Like, I am completely convinced that my family will not show up on me without me knowing. It's impossible for them to do. One of my good friends, Reverend Rogers, I want to thank him so much. We've been working together now for a couple of years. Some pretty interesting things that we've done, but he's always ready. He's always guiding. He's always willing to have different kinds of conversations. For all of you, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I appreciate him greatly. So again, my name is Fredrick Douglas Dixon. I'm only Dixon on payday. I'm Fredrick Douglas Arlington, second generation educator, historian. I'm from a space that is considered to be one of the most impoverished, incorrigible, and if you will, at-risk populations. I'm from the south side of Chicago. So I am a White Sox fan, which makes me at least tolerable compared to a Cub fan, because Cub fans, you know, I think with Cub fans, Sammy Sosa, I think with Cub fans, this is the idea where we think about therapy. Like when it starts, we can use that as a space of where we can take off. But to be here, and my task was to have a conversation about racial justice. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that what we said, racial justice?
Yep.
Compound term. So that being the case with racial justice and a compound term, if we wanted to dissect them first before we move forward, racial and justice, how do they intertwine? Anybody feel free to jump in. Where do we see the connections between racial and justice? And we'll do this like family, so we'll have a conversation. Anybody thought about the compound term, racial justice? Anyone?
When you think of slavery,
Okay.
and injustice,
Okay.
how do you work and turn it around so that you're practicing racial justice in the country rather than keeping people slaves?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can use slavery as a point of conversation, right? And you said, how do we get to it? I think that is something that we hope we can do tonight. Excellent. Excellent. Racial justice. Anyone else? What do we think? First thing come to your mind. This is really like my class. They get super quiet. Walk in and everybody's talking, and I walk in, it's over. Anybody?
That's because they think you have a lot to say.
They do. They do. And they know we have homework and all kind of stuff. So it's the whole dynamic of how we go about that.
Yeah. Well, and this group has done some
I
homework.
see.
Yeah,
You
we've
guys are
read
reading.
1619 project and discussed that part of it last night.
What you think? 1619 project.
And then we also read the Color of Compromise,
Okay.
Really good.
and we're discussing that tomorrow morning.
Okay. So between these two books, what are our takeaways? Anybody? Or in the conversation, what was meant? Go right ahead.
I look at the American Revolution totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Christmas addicts?
what's that?
Christmas addicts?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And we,
Marshville?
and
should just change.
I like that. You don't make me sit down next.
Yeah,
Tell me what you mean.
he says, tell him what you mean.
from that today.
Mhm. It has been what set the pace for what we know as these deep divisions and why we see people scrambling, fighting, and willing to die to keep that as a standard or a yardstick in how we conduct our daily rhythms. So we have spaces of education, spaces of religion, spaces of public accommodations. And in many ways, when it's here in Wyoming, and I can't say this, but only for the short time I've been here, which is 5 years, that in Wyoming, it has a different response because of the monolithic population. So I think about like having everybody here and being right now at 6 o'clock, which means it's 7 o'clock downtown Chicago, you wouldn't have a problem. But at 5 o'clock, how will we move together as a group in the afternoon traffic? Yes, like to have that kind of experience. I was taught very well about how to make sure that you are very able to interact with folks without interacting. So one of the key things about moving in traffic, particularly in downtown Chicago when it's crowded, always make eye contact and don't stare. Make them know that you're not scared, that you keep moving. And I think about how that at this point in this space doesn't really garner this understanding, but having been here, I've garnered so many different understandings, but it's only been for me a blessing. So I'm trained to prepare those for the future generation who look just like me. This is the second generation, I explained that, which means now I'm extending the legacy by being here. And I think about what my dad would have done if he would have been. You guys would have chased him away a long time ago. He would have left a long time. But he prepared me. So between that and thinking about the 1619 project, is there anything that sticks out that anybody remembers that we can start having a conversation? Because I got a PowerPoint and it's ready, but I'd rather leave it right there if we wanted to have a conversation. Go right ahead.
One of our questions to think about was, what is justice?
And that's from the summer PowerPoint.
And I think it's treated fairly.
Okay.
I think, and so racial justice is, don't judge me because I'm a Black man,
Okay.
but you know, I am your equal. And there isn't always more of that. That doesn't happen.
Excellent. Anybody else?
The mental health of African American people in the United States affected by slavery and things that have gone on. I got that from 1619.
Okay.
An injustice that does damage to the psyche of people.
Okay.
Generational trauma.
Physical level, not just the emotional level.
Thinking about that, let's be sure that we can extend again the thoughts and make sure that we have a robust conversation. That's not a one-way street. Let's think about a lynching. The lyncher and the one that's lynched. What does that do for the psyche? Because being with one that understands the psyche is very important, because what comes from the psyche is the actions, the attitudes, and behaviors. And I was always taught that an attitude is an orientation into one's mind. You can tell. Anybody know someone who has really bad day? You can tell the difference. Or somebody who is not an early morning person, after their coffee, they're a little bit better. And by the afternoon, they're a totally different person.
You find them at the 5 o'clock rush in Chicago.
You find
As a
those
white person, I was scared many times.
Well, the one thing I've never been is scared, probably to my own demise. But to me, the being scared and being concerned and then being assertive, they all have their place. They all have just due. And let's get to the idea of justice. What does justice look like to anyone? How about somebody at home? What does justice look like?
Do you have them muted?
So they muted themselves. Pamela, did you want to share?
Yeah, come on.
If we're coming through, do we come through?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Go for it.
Well,
justice to me is everyone being treated as an individual human being on an equal basis. That to me is true justice.
True justice, okay? Anybody agree with that? It's pretty straightforward. I think it hits pillars, if you will. How do we go right ahead?
I mostly agree with that, but I think you need to add another element, and that's not just equality, but equity.
Equity. Tell us the difference. I can understand what you mean, because this is really important.
So equality, we're all treated the same. Equity, everybody gets what they need, which may be different to get the same outcome.
So imagine all of us get laptops. Everybody has a laptop. Half of us get the brand new laptop and half of us get the one that we had last year. That's equity, right? We all have one. But the difference in what we have and what can be produced from it. Absolutely.
There's something about opportunity, right? In that,
Access to
yeah.
opportunity, I would talk.
Yeah.
Access to opportunity. All right. So let's be as candid as we can be. What do you all feel like when we think of what's going on now in our society about having access to multiple perspectives? Meaning 1619 Project was banned in certain public schools. And to me, while it has purpose as a scholar who's second generation and liberatory at the center of all I do, 1619 Project didn't go far. It's incapable. It's created by folks who are bourgeois blacks, like not permanent underclass, not even what we know now as the working class. These are middle class people because they raise their hand if you ask them if they're middle class. So it's the psyche again. Now, I ask everybody, since you got your pens, everybody write this down. The Psychopathic Racial Personality by Dr. Bobby E. Wright. If you want strong reading about the psyche, Dr. Bobby E. Wright, The Psychopathic Racial Personality. He wrote that in 1974 or 1976. Dr. Bobby E. Wright was one of the leading liberatory scholars and practitioners in psych for years. From Mound Bayou, Mississippi, which is an all-black town. So he was raised in a space where he was pushed to be the educated person that would come back and expand what that space was. Dr. Bobby E. Wright also wrote a piece called Menticide. Please write that down, Menticide. When your mental has been, as you said, introduced to homicide, introduced to suicide. And he gets to it in a way that's very striking. And at one point, close to 1980, he had the only all-black mental health facility in the country. Bobby Wright recorded everything. Reverend Roger, you get a kick out of this. I remember I was a very young man and he invited my dad to do something during Black History Month. So we went there and I got a chance to meet him. And he had this camera that was really big. And it reminded me, Reverend Roger, of the Monday Night Football camera. Like if you've ever seen one of those guys with their equipment run into that on accident, it was like a hit on the field. So he recorded everything and now we can't.
It came out of an all-black facility that he was.
It's still around. It is still around. It's still around.
His recordings have been
We don't know.
lost, stolen.
We don't know.
Can't find them.
We don't know. But for you all to have something that I know would probably be hard for you to access if I didn't introduce you to it, those two pieces are as similar.
The book Homegoing
Okay.
was a psychological drama book. What slaves went through in Africa before they were shipped and what they went through on the boat. And it's a historical fiction.
Okay.
But the
It's based on truth.
Homegoing is the psyche is talked about and there's just,
So how do we move that psyche forward that you continue to mention?
yeah.
Well, look at the last name. There's a constant reminder that something had been interrupted in the natural flow. So if you can understand Dixon is Scottish, I have to be one of the most unique Scottish men in the world. literally, have to be,
Built.
right. Right. To understand that, the farthest that we got was to a place called Aberdeen, Mississippi, where Dixon's had been for a couple hundred years. And when I was there, you know, met all kinds of folks. And to make this as real as I possibly can, my address as a kid, up until early adulthood, 8017, 8017, South. It's on the south side of Chicago, 8017 South Aberdeen. That was the name of the street I grew. There's a space that's named after in France. There's a city in France. I was in Aberdeen, Mississippi. I've been to Aberdeen, France. There's an Aberdeen, Maryland. There's an Aberdeen, Scotland. But to understand the psyche, we continue this. And it continues to read what? The interruption. So today, I wanted to, you know, have a conversation, and some of the things I know will be at least inspiring to have a conversation. But if you all just want to have a regular conversation, we can turn this off. That'll be entirely up to you. All right. So
I like both.
What?
I know it's- we have time. That's the problem.
So the first question is, what is the purpose of justice? I got a couple of definitions here, you all. Just behavior or treatment, a concern for justice, peace, and genuine respect for people. Quality of being fair and reasonable, the justice of his case. The establishment or determination of rights according to the rules of law and equity. The quality of being just, impartial, fair. Principle or idea of just dealing or right action or righteousness. Well, how does that in itself read to the laws of nature? Anybody got one law of nature that comes to your mind when you think about the laws of nature?
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest, absolutely.
They're saying the same thing.
Anybody else? Gravity. What
Gravity.
is something? Laws.
Sometimes goes.
Let's look at this one. Laws of use and the laws of abuse. The laws of use say what you don't use properly, you lose. The laws of abuse say what you abuse, you lose. So to think about justice, tying it to the laws of humanity, and those things that govern our gravity pull, the way that we deal with one another, then the further away we get from this understanding of its roots, the more and more we accept behaviors that are so far removed from the origin of where we need to be for what? Sometimes material culture. Anybody know somebody who is very drawn to material culture? Things that, she said, sister, right? Grandchildren. Grandchildren, which means somewhere along the line, grandma's been involved in that too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Mhm. So this idea of understanding the laws of nature, and I can share this, and I know this is being recorded, but at the University of Wyoming, in our School of Culture, Gender, and Social Justice, we are being isolated by president and the provost just because of the optics of our department, and then me. Right? So I have a group from Women and Gender Studies that was isolated and identified. They're very inactive. Latino Studies, very inactive group. Native American, a bit more active, but on the reservation, which makes them active.
Nope.
Right?
It's okay.
I'm not scared of either one. So we had a national search because our director is Stanley. And we had brought down to 3 folks that we got. And there was Latino, there was Black. And sure, absolutely can. And as we went through the process, There are about 16 of us who would have a vote. And it all came down to this young man who was impressive, but had no administrative experience. Now, we're talking about a director. And what comes of the bottom line is that they chose this young man. Yeah. And the dean flagged him. So he has no administrative experience. So we had to go in front of the dean, and when we went in front of the dean, who's an interim dean with no experience,
Aha.
you know, we got a little chippy. Every time we jumped on about this guy, it got a little chippy. So this idea of social justice and us as a group believing that we're not setting the pace for this institution, but it goes to show you that these folks are not what we call attuned enough through cultural competence to be able to make a decision like this without what we know as our biases, and not just working through our biases, but kind of taking over. So bottom line was, during that particular meeting, the interim dean, and I know this is being recorded, reminds me of, everybody remember All in the Family?
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
I think I got it right.
Oh,
Because there's too many times I hear it in my ear, I'm like, that's Archie.
oh, dear.
And I'm looking for Eda, right?
Oh, dear.
And he says in the meeting, he says, well, you know, I didn't have any experience when I took this job. He knew that.
And I was working.
You're on the interim.
And that's what it is. So before it was all over, you know, they all agreed, the vote was like 16-1, that we should hire this one white young man with absolutely no administrative experience, whose specialty was teaching African-American studies. And he emails me and he's like, oh, this list of things I've done, and yeah, is this your dad? And you know, this whole run, and I don't respond. See, here's the thing. That group had to deal with the laws of use and the laws of abuse. The laws of use were, they were for too many years very comfortable with saying social justice advocacy while not being to the point where they could challenge themselves. What else came out of that was the laws of abuse. They had abused this term. So now as the university is squeezing us to become one, which they've already done once, we're on the brink of collapse. So I went in front of them and told them, I use what Malcolm said, it's like the chickens coming home to roost. You have abused this space for too long. And the time is up. My last part of the laws of humanity. Nothing lasts forever. So now it's really chippy, right? It's the tension, you can cut it, but I'm always attuned to that. So I'll tie this to something that I ask you all to make sure that you research on your own. It's called the Negro question. Please write that down. The Negro question in itself comes from the Mohawk Conference of 1890 and 1891. And this was like a space in 1890 where the North and the South agreed to quash the differences from the Civil War. So you see, it took them 25 years. They hosted in upstate New York, which means to the victors go the spoils. And what comes of this is a question. And the question, well, let me take a step back. It was presided over by Rutherford B. Hayes. Anybody know what Rutherford B. Hayes is famous for? Tilden-Hayes Agreement, Tilden-Hayes Compromise, election of 1876. And one of these compromises was that he was going to remove the troops from the South, the federal troops from the South, which will provide protection for the newly freed slave. So he presides over this. And what comes of this is the Negro question. And I'm going to speak it. It says, what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? I'll say it again. For all of you all, please take this down. You won't get this in space. Not even one on. What should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Now, this is a question that comes by 1890, June 1st, June 2nd, June 4th. This is a question that was asked, answered, posed, asked, and answered before it was created. So it makes it very oxymoron. So if we look through that lens of justice, what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Somebody tell me who wrote that down. What's the strongest or what's the most poignant part of that question if we dismount? What maximum exploitation? Can you say it again?
Troublesome, just that assumption.
That's a law.
And
If we go
accusation.
back to the attitude, that's a law by land. How about the presence? Just the presence.
Oh, yeah.
Just the presence causes folks to react a certain way. So to think about it that way, then yes, we can go into a few of these. Guys, we just hope that something that we said will allow for us to continue this conversation, hopefully in the future, but get to the core of human development to the point where we become a bit more attuned. How about this? All of us have seen this, correct? That's the land acknowledgement. Please read it over.
I think the second half is a lie.
This is the University of Wyoming. This is what the university uses before they host events. Tell me which part you say.
We recognize, support, and advocate alongside Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, with those forcibly removed from their homelands. It's one thing to collectively acknowledge and for, the farmers and ranchers and even me with my small 5 acres to acknowledge, yes, I live on the ancestral lands of these tribes. Yeah, I can do that. So can my neighbor, the farmer owns 20,100 acres and so. But to recognize, support, and advocate,
Recognize.
We are-
I like that.
they are not doing that.
What does that even mean? It's so vague.
It's so that, okay, that's part of it. It's vague.
So if we made it more defined, reparations.
mm,
If we were to say that we recognize support through X, Y, and Z, and all of that led to a conversation about reparations and advocate alongside. So what becomes very hypocritical is that I see these flags in many buildings. I told you guys I'm from Chicago, so I find ways to go through the buildings and stay out the cold. That's what you do. And it gets cold here. So I'm through buildings and I'm walking through spaces. that-
Where's the windbreak?
And, some of the folks who work there, it's just this idea of the Negro question when they see it. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm walking through, but folks who are sitting down will come out of their office just to make sure I'm moving and I don't stop. So,
Belong there.
oh, wow. And I think the one thing that kind of scares them half to death, they probably don't want to, in some ways, if they know, they just probably let him be, right? It's kind of like, okay. I've heard that guy before, maybe we don't want it with him, but said, hate has no home here. Some of the most racist folks that I work with. This was taken from absolutely one of the most racist young men that I know, who just with the presence of a troublesome Negro is flustered to the point he has to react and respond in a very demanding kind of way. So I use the standpoint theory. Anybody familiar with the standpoint theory? It's a feminist theory. Standpoint theory says, without a doubt, knowledge is socially situated. What does that mean, Reverend Roger? Knowledge is socially situated. Socially situated. What do you think, Reverend Roger?
Knowledge is socially situated.
Socially situated, what do we mean?
That it exists within us.
It exists in a social structure. Anybody else at home, knowledge is socially situated?
And it's limited.
It's yes. Socially situated means those folks who raise their hand and say they're middle class, which some of us would probably do, is much different than someone from the permanent class. It's much different from someone who considers themselves elite. They have different experiences. Some of those experiences have, if you will, some of them have layover, if you will. But the idea of this is that we highlight voices of the most marginal. That means those from the lower class. Couple ways to look at truth. Couple ways to look at truth. They call it the social truth, the dominant narrative. Textbooks, media, and museums have all played a role in crafting a narrative that can't be supported scientifically or mathematically. Personal truth, the lived experience. I just explained a couple of things that happened recently. Quantifiable truth, we know what that means. And then how about number 4? Becomes very important, the healing truth. It addresses injustice and empowers the victim. How about this? The power lies in this, and who somehow created this was the United Nations, which in itself is extremely hypocritical about them saying reconciliation, about them saying South African apartheid. Those folks are indeed, if you will, without question, guilty. The United Nations. So to think about this and this is the way that I cited you all, so that you know where it came from. But think about the healing truth as we continue on. Injustice and empowers the victim. So it says, this is my answer. Maybe the hardest part, if you teach, is to live your teach. Maybe this is the easiest part for me. And there's no getting around how I look at my responsibility. Talking about the cycle. James Baldwin. Anybody a fan of James Baldwin? James Baldwin was extremely attuned to the time in which he lived. And he represented an outlier as much as anyone could ever, being a writer and a Black homosexual during the time that he lived.
And then rise as a Black homosexual.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And he gives this idea that he talks about this understanding that white people in general are trapped in a history they don't understand. What do you think about that? Or what do you get from that?
Well, after reading the 1619 project, the way it connected the dots that I had not either been taught or didn't connect myself, like generational wealth.
Okay.
And how Black people were unable to build generational wealth, or it was stolen from them. And how that's still happening.
Okay.
The Harris-Smith
Okay.
community, that their land was taken away and not given back. And those are that's just one example.
Good. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I know I'm always in your way. Right? Okay. Good. Good. I got you working.
When you're in the majority, to be successful in society, you don't need to understand.
There's a
You
power.
don't have to learn.
In fact, the power dynamic makes sure that you fight against multiple perspectives.
Mm.
When you bring up systemic racism, see a lot of white people, it's like,
They don't even know what you're talking about.
It took me to be here to figure that out.
Mm.
I just thought it was a bunch of BS. We had a 4-week conversation with white men about white privilege a couple years ago called Speak No Evil, and that's what's one of my takeaways. That they do not have to deal with.
And therefore, it does not exist.
Didn't document, didn't happen, doesn't exist. What he's saying here is that what you understand is privilege. What you understand is superiority from that privilege. I'm sorry, the supremacy, and then what it brings every day. So what he's saying is that without question, you have been trained that you are the goose that laid the golden egg. You have traveled the world in many spaces to make sure the darker folks of the earth feel as if you have supplanted God and Jesus with white. So to understand what he's saying, he said, most folks, how about that one person that you know is not going to become any more attuned because they choose to. They choose not to. Because it is a space of privilege. I think about, I have a group of young men. Most of them are athletes. And it's a leadership group. And it's, I'm telling you. But out of the group, about more than 3/4 have entered in the transfer portal to leave this institution and go play the numbers. Yeah. Those are my kids. Especially the ones that they're writing. They told those young men, anybody familiar with NIL, name, image, and likeness, what that means? That means that the university and others can pay these young men now as if they were professionals, when at one time that wasn't.
They couldn't pay them anything.
Right. They were amateurs. All that's changed. And so one of the young men was being badgered all year about his injury, about how things were going, and he was really down. And this young man, one of the best people on the planet to me, and he and I have been doing a research project or history project with his family. Grandfather played in the NFL, dad played in the NFL. Turns out, granddad and grandma met at the University of Oregon right around 1970. Does anybody know what 1970 represents? That's the height of Black power. That's the height of Black power. And as granddad was trying to date grandma, she made him pass out flyers on the campus. You know how women make you do things when it's on the table just like that, right? Now what you gonna do, right? So it comes out that as he's doing this research over here, he does an oral history project with his grandmother. His grandmother was a Black Panther.
Was it what?
A Black Panther.
Wow.
Grandfather or grandmother?
Grandmother.
Grandmother, go mom.
Grandmother was from Oakland.
Okay.
This is the home of the Black Panther Party in 1966, Mary College. She had gone to Mary. She was friends with Tupac Shakur's mother and aunt. They were all together. And he walks in the room. He said, this is an independent study. He said, shit, in my research to your grandmother? Yes.
Yeah.
Go right to grandma.
Yeah.
He presented his research at a conference online. His grandmother was there. So we had a Zoom after she was thanking me for what I said. This young man is ready to continue in many ways. And now he's not here. And the reason that he's not here is because of their treatment. We all know that athletes and universities, that's a very
Unhealthy, predatory.
it's like a pimp and prostitute.
Mhm.
That's the way you can look at it. So another left and another left and another left, another left and another left and another left, another left. And these men continue to say, we're going to keep doing exactly what we're doing as it gets. Just this idea of supremacy won't even allow you to say, I might need to think about this differently.
Yeah.
So to think about what Baldwin is saying, he said, it's just not understood. I don't know if anybody has ever seen her, but let's hear from Jane Elliott.
Any white person was born and raised in school in the United States of America. If you aren't a racist, you're American. Yeah. Even that you think yourself. Because that's right. It seems that whiteness can have all the adventures and There's been a conversation. Social studies, which is the evidence of this. It's hard. We can do it. So they take them. Because people have the different, there's space to give these. Start teaching the truth about history. If we start teaching about Nile Valley contributions to civilization, it would totally change the way we conduct ourselves in life. It's not.
Tell people that they're. This guy's something. Most people will say, I'm not racist.
So my best friend's black. Yeah, then you say it's fun. So, say something. Some say, say, then. As an attempt to gain seeing the color of my skin. Is it all right for you to see me kind of pink? That's okay for me. That you don't mind being seen the color you are. You have a right to be what you are. And tell people of this world, get into their heads that the first modern human beings involved on this earth were white women. They evolved in 30,000 years ago. Where human being on the face of the earth today runs the memory of those black women's genetic structure in their genes. Now, we don't want to admit that, but that's the way it is. And people, as people move farther and farther from the equator, their bodies produce less and less melanin. Whereas they move in fish and a lot of vegetables, so their skin took on a different tone. I found that out when I was raising little kids. My husband was in the soup department. He had a produce department. And they had lots of oranges that they couldn't eat very well. And I'm feeding my kids orange juice like you never saw in your life. They get it out of orange juice to their skin. Something. She said, "Are you feeding this kids?" I said, "Well, that's orange juice." She said, "Stop it if you want to stop being orange." The big thing, the skin guard, is an excellent outlet, the body's natural reaction to the natural environment. Get over it.
So, if all white people are racist, or any, can they be all white?
Of course they can. Of course they can. Of course they can be. It's called education. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the root dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in leading people out of ignorance. But I know you can change them.
Where, and who, Jane Elliott?
Jane Elliott, yes.
Who did- So she's an educator, but where at?
She's out of Wisconsin originally. So,
Dr. Wynn, Malcolm X once that he dropped out of school early, didn't have a lot of formal education. And somebody said, how have you become such a well-spoken philosopher and political scientist? And he said, because I was not contaminated by the American education system.
to understand Malcolm X is to understand his dad. Reverend Little was a preacher. He was also a local organizer with Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was the largest Black movement in the history of the 20th century. It came from RBIs. Let's go back to what Jane Elliott said. Anything interesting that she said? Anybody stuck out? Is there anything that she said that stuck out? That was one thing that she was
I
making.
thought of skin color changing other than when I spend too much time in the sun.
Okay.
Just by what we eat.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, the environment, yeah.
Is there anything else that she said? One thing that she said was totally incorrect, but she tried. said that she could trace back this group
Oh.
of where we found the original folks 280,000 years. There's nothing that you can trace about the origin of the Black man, woman, and child. That's the original folks of the planet.
She had said 2 million years, I'd give her a little more.
She just stuck her foot in her mouth by trying to give it a date. There is no date. So for us to understand what she's saying, let me ask you all this. What is the power in giving value to giving a moral value to a physical feature? Can you guys write that down? Because that'll be something that you'll want to kind of come back to. What is the value in giving a physical feature moral value?
It's something you can try to control.
Okay.
It's a sense of, okay, got this put in the box. And
Okay. Sure.
Well,
What do you think? A moral value on a physical feature. And then, do you have an example? She just told me I always pick on her. I hadn't forgotten about it until she said it.
I have
So
an
she-
example, but he's picking on you, so you go ahead.
I think you're conflating the spiritual, the moral value
Okay,
with the physical.
okay,
And they have to work together, but they're not the same thing.
okay. So,
So an example,
Yeah.
give me a second.
okay,
Um,
this is double check.
Well, I mean, the obvious example in this context is that white is good and black is bad,
Skin color.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
or hats or horses.
And female characteristics, physical characteristics.
How about good hair?
Oh, good hair.
Stop it, everybody.
Mhm,
Moral value on a physical feature. Good hair.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
You like kind of reflects that, right? But let's be clear, a moral value on a physical feature. So if you guys have never seen me, you want to be entertained just a little bit. Chris Rock has a piece that's been out about 10 years called Good Hair. And he takes you to the beauty shop itself. And if you've never been, it's a good way to get some sort of introduction to it. But a moral value on a physical feature, skin color. Hair, what else?
White Jesus.
Ooh,
Like blue-eyed, you blonde Jesus.
blue eyes, go again, what else? Blonde hair,
The fairies can cure the person.
moral value on a physical feature creates a power dynamic. Either you got it or you don't. So moral value on a physical feature. Let's always remember that that in itself sets this theoretical perspective into a practical practice. So when we think about it, the looking glass self, where we begin to look at ourselves and our social interactors like a mirror. It creates a judgment and then the values and behaviors. Creates a judgment, values, and behaviors. So you will see Black women spend billions of dollars to get their hair to be straight. What does that
While the
say?
rest of us are curling it.
I was straightening my hair.
What does that say? That say that they believe that this moral value that's been used to separate them as inferior, they can ameliorate it. They can change it.
Michael Jackson,
Michael Jackson.
bleaching his skin.
Michael Jackson owning the rights to Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, the Beatles. Why he's not here with us anymore. So to understand how these things work themselves out on a daily basis, let's look to what they say is the looking glass self. Implicit bias, a couple of these I'm going to move right along, but implicit bias in itself means that you have this hidden behavior that's a phenomenon that you don't necessarily know. Let's look at it this way. Definition for white.
Oh,
How do we get to the cycle?
ouch.
Does it play itself out to where it becomes practical? Not just the psyche. How do we reinforce it every damn day? Are we in the church now? The Bible, right? And hell too.
Preach it.
And hell too, right?
What the term, black sheep,
Okay,
you know,
look at white lie.
oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, What's a good non-racist phrase when you're talking about the concept of a black sheep? You're just the one who,
How about the black cat?
the black
Like
cat.
the black hat.
Uh-huh.
Black cat is bad luck.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
got black.
Yeah.
Like the white guy that started all that.
Uh-huh.
So when we think about these terms, free from blemish, without sin, morally, spiritually pure, spotless, innocent, free from evil intent, harmless, notions of racial superiority. These definitions come from the 1950s, Reverend Rogers. So let's tie this to what Dr. King was fighting against. A dehumanization.
Yes, this was an
These are the
actual
fifth.
dictionary.
These are the 50s. Yes, from Merriam-Webster. So can someone point out one to them that they think is interesting? Totally ridiculous.
The assumption that white means free from blemish.
Okay. Okay.
Free from evil.
The assumptions behind it stand out.
It's a power dynamic.
Yeah.
So now we've gone from the physical feature to what?
The
Something
morals.
you can touch.
Mhm.
I grew up in an all-white township.
Really?
And all-white school until my senior year, one black. Great, wonderful guy.
Got a hell of a hook shot.
Oh, well, no, he was a musician. He was a great musician.
That's gonna
But
be
I
exciting.
saw evil being performed and said by a bunch of white people all my life.
Can you imagine what he was attempting to do?
Mm.
He was attempting to do what Dr. King was attempting to do. He was attempting to do what? Integrate into an existing white institution.
Yeah.
And he might have had grandeurs of vision as an equal. So let's someone point one out to me, and then we're gonna move right along. And explain it just very basically. Which one is of most interest?
I don't know that I can.
Spiritually pure.
Moral, spiritual, pure. Pure means without blemish, right? Anybody else?
Undiluted.
Notions of racial superiority.
Okay.
I mean, they all stand out as
So
blaring.
if this is the mindset that leads to talking about physical features that goes back to the psyche, then imagine the folks that raised you
Mhm.
and how they raised you. Here's how we get to the core of it. Somebody point one out. I don't want to read it.
Soil dirty.
Okay. Anybody else?
Disgrace.
Okay.
Without hope.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
One that strikes me as the first one, opposite to white. If you use that previous definition,
That's the one.
that covers it all.
Same one I'm thinking.
No.
That's why we. So if this is how the lines are being drawn, if this is the standard or the yardstick, then to police these folks differently, to dehumanize them in a way that puts you in a position of superiority, it in itself, then we understand it a bit better.
Yeah, the book stamped from the beginning talks about where this racial kind of thing came with skin color. And
Moral value, physical
yeah, when you
features.
start discovering more in Africa, we got to figure out where we stand in the.
I know.
British said we've got to figure out where we stand in all this. Of course, the whites, you know, if these were British scientists that wrote this stuff,
But their science doesn't stand up to the test of truth,
no,
nor justice. So to understand that what Jane Elliott said, that all of us have certain DNA that comes from Black women, if you will. And there's this understanding that Black women, when they have children, it's always to the point, or any woman that has children, but Black women. There's Black women that can have children. They can be teased and tan, butter brown, black as 1,000,000 midnights, and they're white. This proves to you scientifically that was done experiment when you take the paints and you mix them all up. What color do they come back?
Black.
So to understand that whiteness in itself becomes this space that it did not have legs in Europe because the throne was over whiteness. And maybe it still is. But to think about it as to understand blacks as others and whiteness. There we go, everybody. Othered and whiteness as centrality. Can everybody read this really quickly?
If you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, he'll give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Who's that?
President.
That's the United States President of the United States, right? Lyndon Baines Johnson from Texas, right?
Is that not a
Did you
description of
say
what
that as
happened?
president? Did you say that as president?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So what part of this do we need to unpack, you all, before we go forward? Because we're doing this and you guys are doing a great job, but what do we need to unpack before we move on?
I feel like, maybe I'm jumping, but I feel like that's what Trump did. Give the white man somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Well, Trump was a response to Barack Obama. So the problem was, to many folks, Barack Obama. And we can understand that. That's the 44th president of the United States. I'm from a part of Chicago where I understand not just how he came to be, I understand how he hijacked his wife's whole identity to become this guy from Chicago, which he was not.
No. His mom's from Kansas, and he was
And I
born
got
in
something else for you all about that.
Hawaii. Yeah.
Let's pick out a few key terms. And again, everybody, let me tell you how great you all are. Right? This is real, right? This is what I came for.
Yes, it is.
Hoping that we would have conversation. Somebody tell me a couple of key terms. I'm in Trina's way, and she got to be tired of me getting up.
I can sit right there.
Now I'm in the way for that too, right? What do we need to unpack? The word convince, right?
Yep.
So, is this a way that we look at the moral value, the physical feature, the idea of definition, and then from the very top, if you will, of the food chain, this idea? Cheryl Harris, she is one of the chief architects of critical race theory. She now works at UCLA. She should be ready to retire. Brilliant young lady. And she wrote a piece called Whiteness as Property. Please write that down. Cheryl Harris, Whiteness as Property. Following the period of slavery and conquest, white identity became a racialized basis or racialized privilege that was ratified and legitimized in law as a type of status property, meaning you can count on it. Meaning you can count on it. How can you count on it?
It gets me privilege. It gets me in the door.
Tell me one thing more than just theory. What does it do?
I can walk down the street and pretty much count on being safe.
Okay. That's the way you lay it out. Absolutely. Anybody else? How else do we look at it?
When I was teaching Taekwondo, I drove around with a backseat full of weapons all the time. Never got bothered about it a bit.
Wow. Yeah. What you need the weapons for? You were a weapon.
You guys, it's really different. He was part of the street, he's one of my closest friends. And he and I had a conversation about receipts from Walmart. He's a meticulous record keeper. He keeps his receipt. I tell him I keep my receipt so they don't say I stole what I got in my bag.
Wow. He's white. And so he's just keeping it because he's that record keeping.
Tony. Legend, line.
For a bookkeeper.
He's available. He's definitely available. But we had the same experience, much different in our mindsets. I'm not leaving out of a store without a receipt and a bag. These folks right down the street that new to you. Do you need a bag? Absolutely. Do I need a receipt? Yeah. Can I put it in the bag? Nope, put it in my hand.
And you can.
So to understand what she's saying is for you all to be able to drill down and how this is part of your daily rhythms. Anybody else got an example? How about you? I didn't get your name. I forgot. Jordan, like Michael Jordan. You good friend. I saw all 6 of those championships.
Yes.
We did too.
We were in Chicago at the time.
Yeah. I would tell you guys a story, but that would take us way off. What you think? You have some of those weapons that.
What she's saying, it,
And while as a woman, I do have some worries about safety. Generally, I'll make it back.
she can take a walk at night as a white woman and be safe.
Not like Aubrey.
Let me speak to them. If Jordan, and this is how I play on the site, coming at one each another as we're walking down the street. The first thing, and this is to show you how to play this on the site. I'd rather have her believe that I am standoffish and maybe even angry, because I'm not going to say a word when she walks back. When folks tell me all the time, well, you know, you should be able to talk to me. All Jordan has to do, not saying you, Jordan, so don't feel as if this is not an example. All she has to do is say, I said something to you in a way that she took it the wrong way. To say I was flirting. Anybody ever heard of Death of Black Wall Street? Sarah Page.
Can you speak? I'm sorry, speak
Sarah
up. please.
Page was the elevator operator. Dick Rowland was the young man who jumped on that elevator. You know, they were both Florida State. They knew each other for years. They had like a relationship for years. So what I'm saying, there's power in this exchange. And let me tell you, working where I work, where there are very few Black men, white women are very aggressive when they're attracted to. Period. So that part of this is saying that you're certainly not scared of me. There have been a list that looks like a dictionary where just the wrong thought came about, immaterial. So it's property. You can count on it. It's cash. You can cash it in. It's better than Bitcoin. Just mentioned that.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Where'd it go? There it is.
That's why we call it Kirsten.
Where is it?
It's a filter.
It's to the right, so drag your cursor to the left. See if you can find it. There he is.
Rodney mentioned this, so he was on the same page.
James Baldwin, And I want to give a warning. I'm going to use some very graphic language. Is that all right with everyone? Sure. Yeah?
We're good. Bring it.
All right. Do my best.
I learned it all when I was in ninth grade.
You lose your cursor again?
It is, this
Where's
is,
Dixon? Can't see it.
How we doing with time?
We got 50 minutes.
50 or 15?
50.
50.
5-0. 5-0.
Take a break? Can we keep moving?
Let's keep going.
All right. So everybody, anything that struck you that Baldwin said?
Most important thing is person.
Tell me again, I'm sorry.
The most important thing was the person, the people. I think that's what he said anyway. It's like not the color or anything else.
To illustrate what I think, in 1964, I worked at a gas station where everybody was white and on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And George Wallace was running for president. And
Segregation now, segregation forever?
yeah. And one of the guys started talking about how he's a George Wallace fan and how all those niggers are going to pay. And I turned to him and I said, the only nigger I know is you. And we were ready to go, and the boss stepped in between us. But just like he did, he turned it around and says, if you want the derogatory term, is you, not me.
Okay. Anybody else?
I gave the problem back to you.
Change the power dynamic. One thing he said, I don't know if anybody caught it. It's kind of hard to catch it on the first time. Those things need to be. He's smoking a cigarette. He smoked for years, so I think he was kind of being super cool too, because he looked real cool. But what comes to this is he says that it's important. He didn't use those terms. He said, without it, what do you have?
the white is no longer the top of the pile. That's a spring.
Going back to what the president said, he said, if you can convince
Mhm.
and give this enemy a face. So we talked about this, right? The Negro question.
What is wrong with that picture? So many things.
So the Mohawk Conference, and what they were saying at the Mohawk Conference, this is the first one, 1890, that if we don't get this problem or this question correct, there will be black men marrying white women, and those black men will look as they're illustrated there. All right, so how do we get in this physical space where we talk about changing one from a human to a slave? So does anybody know the dates of the transatlantic slave trade, so-called dates? George's looking it up. She's just like being in class. She's just like.
1619.
When's it in?
What's that?
18 something.
18, absolutely 18 something.
1861.
61.
1861, the war's still going on.
Before the trade from Africa supposedly ended. 1835 or something.
1835. Anybody else? 1619 to 1865, so-called dates of the transatlantic slave trade. So-called dates, meaning they're not at all correct. So we know by 1555, John Hawkins was trading slaves in what we know now as Virginia, North Carolina. Sir Walter Raleigh, last name Raleigh, reminds you of the capital of what? North Carolina. So to understand that, everybody write this down. Put 1619 in an equation form. And then under that, write 1555. And this is turned quickly into a math.
Oh, you're gonna roll my brain.
And before that, the Portuguese.
They were very instrumental. And the Dutch, you got that right, both of those.
1550.
55 at the bottom, 1619 at the top. Tell me what we come up with.
64.
64, everybody's pretty right there. Anybody remember television show?
$64,000.
$64,000 question. That was Merv Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
So with the 64 years represent what was concocted and crafted into a scientific formula on how to take Africans as individuals, as humans, and train them and change them into slaves. 64 years of slavery unrecorded, more than one vein. So when we think about, and we say it now, because I can remember my grandmother and my mother, well, when you stump them, what would they say? That's the $64,000 question. Well, when you took a child, what is the $64,000? $64,000 question reads just like you just got. So looking at this, the origin and development of the social being called the Negro. How did we create the Negro? Use the same basic principles as breaking a horse. This is a scientific process. Reduce them from their natural state of nature. Break them on a natural string of independence. Create a dependent status that circles around the slave. More specifically, let's look at the problematic issue of the most valuable person in slavery. That's the black woman. Why is she valuable? Why is she the most
She
valuable?
can produce children.
She's going to produce generation. What do they say here? Reverse the natural relationship. So how do you do that? Destroy the black man. From that, you get this psychologically dependent, and she's in a frozen, independent state. And I know many folks will argue, but let's make sure that we understand the time and what looked like a nuclear family, even though they weren't able to marry legally.
And always knew they could be ripped apart.
Oh, absolutely. It said raise the male and the female offspring in reverse roles. Strong black woman, right? Mm-hmm. Independent, educated, not necessarily interested in some of these old thoughts. Fear of the young male's life, the mother will train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. This is part of the 64 years of this scientific process. The Negro Questions in the Founding Fathers. Anybody ever read the notes on the state of Virginia? Everybody? I know you do all the time. Put it on your, and that's something that you and I can get through. He's brilliant about his understanding of land, particularly in Virginia. He's brilliant about Thomas Jefferson. He's brilliant about how he can make sure that the majority of the population will be addicted to tobacco. What's the name of that space out there? Tobacco Road. What he does is tell you how to keep and maintain slavery. And what does he say? I advance it as suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to whites in the endowments of both body and mind. Let's go through it really quick. He says what in the first? Suspicion only.
Once it's out there, it becomes truth.
Suspicion only. I got nothing to back this up on. He said whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances. It's very important. He said originally a distinct race. Originally a distinct race means what?
Oh, not human. And different.
Innate. Innate means what? God. What did he say? Originally made by God distinct or made by time and circumstances distinct. Are inferior, both body and mind. Never forget he had this love affair with Sally Hemings that produced at least 5 children that lived. Say he owns 600 plus slaves. And if you believe Sally Hemings is the only one.
Yeah.
Drapetomania. Anybody ever heard of that?
Not till I read the books.
Drapetomania means that you have a sickness if you run away from slavery, if you escape. And they said it is curable. One way it was curable was cut your foot off. Another way was, as you mentioned, sell a few of those children away.
What's the word come from?
I don't know exactly where it comes from. I'm clear on what it means.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry about that, but I was honest with you.
No, that's true.
How about this? Emancipation in the Negro Question. On September 18th, 1858, in a debate with Stephen S. Douglas. Now you talk, Stephen F. Douglas. Now you're talking about state of Illinois. They had 5 different debates over the state. And Douglas whooped. Yeah, he whooped Lincoln. Right? Lincoln did not really do well in many of those races until he ran for president. What's one of the nicknames we know about Abraham Lincoln?
Great.
Honest Abe.
The great emancipator.
Great emancipator, rail splitter.
Yeah.
Someone read that for me?
Say then that I am nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the 2 races living together on terms of social and political equality.
He says this as a politician. He's speaking to folks in Illinois, so-called liberals, right? So to think about emancipation and the Negro question, there's a political response. There's a social response. Let's think about this. Everybody hold it right there. Let's take December 31st, 1862. New Year's Eve. President is making plans for free blacks to be moved to Liberia. The problem with the slaves is that they see the free blacks. January 1st, 1863, what was that? Emancipation Proclamation. What happens on that day? Think about the social atmosphere. 4 million folks who had been slaves for over hundreds of years instantly become what? Free. Let me ask you all a question. We talked about this in class. I think that you guys got it. What would happen if 500 Black families moved into Laramie? What would happen? Absolutely.
Scare Wyoming to death.
Absolutely.
People get, start pulling guns.
Anybody else? I agree. But I'm just wondering, think about this as a way to be able to deal with 4 million overnight. That's immediate emancipation. That's not gradual. What do you all think would happen? Okay. 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 All right. So after the assassination of Lincoln, his vice president, Andrew Johnson, who was representing Tennessee at the time, he created these proclamations that allowed for each state that succeeded to rewrite their constitution. He also, pardoned Confederates. He opposed the 14th Amendment. Anybody familiar with the 14th Amendment? Rights of citizens. What did Lincoln just say? Jurors, marry, none of that. Hold office, that's rights of citizens. So they had to restrict him from firing cabinet officials because there was such a regular thing. So who's he sound like? No.
I thought the same thing.
He was impeached. So as a way to look at Reconstruction, slavery by another name is what the goal was. And the exception clause of the 13th Amendment said you are free until you commit a crime. Then you can be sent back to free labor. So micro assaults. This is how we look at it. Anybody ever heard of microaggressions? What does that do? Anybody especially thought about the word microaggression? What does it mean? Anybody?
Bitty things that.
Small, right? You put the word micro in front of it.
But it's still aggressive and violent. Yeah.
Agree?
Like pointing your finger in somebody's face.
That to me is saying what you're ready for. Microaggression. Anybody else microaggression?
Takes away your sense of self.
Sure. How about an example? You said yourself over that one. You're way too easy. Way too easy. I used to play basketball. That's enough. I don't even have to look. She told me that I can go get it.
Okay, so example, when you walk through the building, people come out to check and make sure you're still moving.
That's right. That's right. Anybody else microaggression? I jump on the elevator. Lady grabs the purse.
Scoots over to the corner.
And I sit behind. So that's me taking control of the wheel. Or microaggression. Microaggressions are not money. There's nothing microaggression. It's intent. It has intent to make sure that you're sitting in your place. I don't know if I've ever told you this, brother Roger, but right now time next to the ice cream place, which I frequent all the time. If I get out of here in time, but me and you've been there before, Reverend Roger, right? So on the other side, going east, there is a kind of trinket shop and there's handicap parking. Everybody know what I mean? So I was the lady who I thought owned stuff. She came out. I turned. I take these things as putting this one on the list, putting this one on the list. I said, what makes you think you can tell me what to do? She got even more frustrated. She ran right in, called the police. Police came, sheriff pulled up, Apple Hands, was a friend of mine. He's like, what happened? The lady's like, he turned his music up. And before long, one of the other city police said, man, I'm so sorry. I said, what's going to happen here if this hadn't gone a certain way? She brings you all to this to bring a gun to this experience. And what comes out of all of that, I bump into that lady at the Martin Luther King celebration. Damn, not only because God is good, and I not draw from my lower self and call her out because I'm really good for that, right? That's just how petty I am, right? Got you, it comes back. But we're talking about these micro songs.
She was at the,
She left when she saw me.
Really?
She had it up. Yeah, she did. And one of her friends was like, what are you doing? And we came, she was like, oh my God, I'm leaving. Right? So we think about oppression by imposition, whether it's a bullet or a stick or shackles or a fist, or can be gendered, unhealthy food, cause of pain, ensure of self-determination of the lack of. It's this imposition that you go through on a daily basis. It's an imposition about your movement. So she had the right to call the police to stop my movement because she thought my music was too loud. There's 16 speakers in my truck. I have been trying to get that sound for 30 years. And I've bought speakers in this car, amps in this car, and that one works perfectly.
And you are not going to waste it.
But she wanted to make sure that I was put in my place.
Yeah.
That's an imposition. So we have to realize that these small microaggressions become quickly spaces where we know that have been dealt with very violent. So let's think about the American lynching movement. This is a timeline, you all. We're moving forward. This is a timeline. So this is after emancipation. This is Reconstruction. And how will the United States move into the 20th century with this newly freed Negro? What should be done in the presence of a troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Just look at what we see in the background. All men for the most part. But what does it do? It transcends what? What does that crowd transcend? At least religion, right? Because everybody is not Catholic. What else does it transcend? Class. Because not only is the boss there, but the manager's there and the worker. It transcends time and space. Some folks came from out of town to see this. So the American lynching movement is this space that we look to deconstruct the violence. Just a few of the articles that come up very quickly. What does the lynch mob do? It usurps your ability to have a trial or whatever you're charged for.
It transcends the law.
Absolutely. Mob mentality. It usurps it. It goes right around. And then the Berlin Conference. Anybody familiar with the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885?
I don't remember this one.
This is where European countries divided the center. So at the same time that eventually becomes the Negro question, locally in America, they've already divided the last pieces of Africa up in a way. And this was by the first German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. If you've heard of him, there's Bismarck, North Dakota, isn't it? And then how will the United States move into the 20th century? Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal. Look at Mr. Plessy, 7/8 white. Jumped on the train, and this was all concocted to challenge all black spaces, all white spaces in travel. 7/8 white. He jumps on the train in New Orleans and Louisiana. He goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And what does the Supreme Court say? Separate but equal is the law of the land. So what comes in the 20th century? We see the rise of the eugenics movement. Anybody familiar with the eugenics movement? It says, for the most part, some folks will be able to reproduce, and that will make the world better, and others will not. That's how the 20th century starts. How about this? These are a few very graphic images, you all. And this in itself is an advertisement. Look at the physical features, please. Maybe exaggerated for reinforcement. And if you shoot it right in the middle, where do you shoot it? Right in the mouth. Right in the mouth. You see that term? Watermelon cone. How do you reinforce it? How that reinforcement becomes profitable. How do you sell stuff to folks now? Well, we know sex sales. We know violence sales. So here, this idea of dehumanization sells, and it still does. In Florida, blacks use children, use as alligator bait. See the over-exaggerated eyes? This reinforces the psyche. If this is what will make you buy it, imagine how you feel when you purchase. Imagine the conversations you have with those who are just like you. Everybody likes Aunt Jemima syrup, don't they? Anybody got something at home? I do, absolutely.
It was good syrup.
Oh, I remember. So to look at these ways that were profitable, but what were they doing during this time of the early 1900s? Reinforcing this idea of slavery by another name. Ernest Cantor, a Jewish performer. For years, he made mockery in blackface. It'd be kind of hard to sit down with some of those folks from the Jewish community and have a conversation about this. Particularly those who don't want to have a conversation. Colorado State, 2019. None of them were expelled from the university. How does it keep coming up? Where are these conversations happening? At the dinner table.
Was it fraternity?
No. These were friends. So imagine a conversation that was had before they went to school. Imagine what was reinforced, that they felt like they knew that there would be no repercussions. So now to think about the phenomenon, and this is Bobby Wright, 1974. Psychopathic racial personality. Everywhere one finds whites and blacks in close proximity to each other, whether it's Chicago or Zimbabwe, whites are in control. Yet blacks rarely question this extraordinary universal phenomenon, which defies every known statistic, law, or probability. In fact, blacks denounce those who simply raise the question with admonitions such as, we should not be racist and treat them as they treated us. In fact, whites are not going to allow blacks to treat them as they have treated blacks, so that requires no discussion. That's Bobby Wright. Psychopathic racial personality. So to understand how we go from these reinforcements to it becoming internalized and becoming self-hate. Malcolm asked you. So implicit bias in policing. There's a way to say they need to be policed different because they're not quite like we are. Some things about marginality and oppression, I'm going to skip you all because I want to bring this to its height and then close it down. Nixon, war on blacks. This is what we call the war on drugs. Everybody remember that, right? What does Holloman say? We know we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war, those are their own children, or black, but getting public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin. He just told you what happened to the Black Power movement, that they put heroin into the black community.
That was True. The the Panthers did some really good work.
Black Panthers are indeed a space that needs to be more fleshed out for those folks who weren't living through that or don't have a realistic and accurate memory. A couple of weeks ago, we had Mrs. Akuno and Jerry came out from the University of Wyoming. She was Chairman Fred Hampton's wife, and she told us her thoughts about Judas and the Black Messiah. So our students get a healthy dose of multiple perspectives. This is Dylan Roof. Anybody remember Dylan Roof? Out of South Carolina, Mother Emanuel AME Church. It's the oldest church in Charleston. Also Denmark Vesey's church. Anybody familiar with Denmark Vesey? He had a spoiled, if you will, slave rebellion. He walked into that church and prayed with them and killed all but one. And they say, I don't know how true this is. And they say when he was arrested, the police took him to Burger King and asked what he wanted. That's what they say. Reverend Roger, we don't know that. But to understand how this young man gets to the point where he understands that folks will be proud of him. Did you see his GoFundMe page after that overnight, like $3 million? This is the young man from the Tops assassination in Buffalo last summer. These are young men. These are children who have had this thorough indoctrination of what they need to do to maintain their own status. This is George Floyd. Last thing he did was call for his mother. Because they felt as if they lost an election. The president called them out.
Basically, it was a mini civil war.
Absolutely. So we'll bring it to its height and then we'll close it down. Allyship, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice advocacy. When you hear the term allyship and it's associated with white allyship, what do you think?
We stick together.
We stick together, okay? Allyship, because there is no clear-cut definition that represents because it's so relative. Anybody? What does it mean to be an ally?
You support.
Support.
Stand with.
Stand with, part of the support. Anything else? Call it out. An ally.
Fight alongside.
Right alongside. I think one
That
of the-
means they have some common enemy.
Okay, all right,
That would mean
collectivism.
that they have some common enemy, yeah.
Okay. So to look at this word allyship and why it's so complex. To be an ally, in many ways, means you may be forced to take orders from somebody you think is smart. That may be one of the things that happens. It always pushes your line about where you draw the line. Maybe you're creating new lines. But we all have our line that we won't go past. And to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, make sure we understand this is a $1 billion industry. And in that $1 billion industry, diversity, equity, and inclusion is Malcolm, my brother Malcolm X says, like a fox running the hen house. The University of Wyoming has had diversity and equity and inclusion professionals for over 6 years. Nothing has changed with the ways that they recruit and the students that are currently part of the population. Somewhere around 9,000, I think 8,000, 80 Black students. Now remove the football team and keep the basketball team, right? If you choose to. See, diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't have the proclivity to change the daily rhythms at its core. There's an object that goes along with it. So what do they do with me? they'll take my event, put it on their Facebook page at Racial Black Studies. Now, when they did it, it was so backwards because they chose one of the most challenging conversations I've ever had on the campus, right? We were talking about the Negro question. We had a young man out from the University of Florida, and his research was about slaves that rebelled by jumping over the ship. So by the time they finally apologized, it was the president. And don't get me wrong, you all have a relationship with the president. We were at another institution, right? We both were at the University. So I've known him and his wife for years. So to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion does, it reinforces the status quo. They control the purse strap. So let me ask you this. Could someone create a diversity and equity and inclusion training for the entire campus and be a racist? Absolutely. Could they bring out folks who will reinforce this milquetoast kind of conversation? We're talking about their jobs when we talk about what DEI is. Fredrick Douglass. And this is what we talk about when we say diversity professionals, particularly blacks, particularly black men, those who profess to favor freedom and yet appreciate agitation, are men who want crops without plowing up. These folks, these black professionals that you know, that you see, are so scared of being fired. So scared of not making faith with those who have been their open enemy. It took 500 years to make a Negro. That Negro's not going away this weekend. This is Dr. King's daughter, Bernice. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, we should have more inclusivity. So what the terms that I created are social justice bigotry, social justice suppression, social justice racism is rampant in DEI. It absolutely undergirds the daily mechanisms. Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he gives a critique of the white liberal. I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white model. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens councilor or the Ku Klux Klan white model, who is more devoted to order than the justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Goes on to say, I agree with you. He talks about this is what the moderator said. I agree with you in the goals. I cannot agree with you with your methods of direct action. Your paternalistically believes he can set a timetable for another man's freedom, who lives in the mythical concept, time, constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient seat. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating. An absolute misunderstanding from the people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. 1963. Now I thank you all for your time. And this has been so enjoyable. And if this doesn't move the needle, these are the spaces that we all should walk away and continue these conversations. Mary, thank you so much for always inviting me. And it's pretty rare that I get invited back. First time goes on. Right. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon.
Before we got to move, last week, you guys got some walk, you got some take.
Oh.
Walking to.
We just. Think about them.
Pamela, I'll go ahead and share these with you, what I get, okay?
This is for you.
That would be great. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the names of all the authors, I think I
Yeah.
caught Jane
Elliot.
Elliott, and I know of James Baldwin
Yeah.
already. Read some few of
Okay.
his things.
Yep, I've got
So
some of the
that would be
others.
very helpful.
Okay,
Good.
sounds good.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate
Thanks
the
for
information.
joining us.
Yeah, it was good to be here.
Dr.
Dr.
Dixon,
Douglas.
Fredrick, we want
Douglas
to say
Dixon.
thank you. So we have a small gift.
Okay, thank you. I'm always in the.
Thank you for sharing with us today, coming and for helping us.
Is it a gift certificate to the-
Yes,
I park on the other side of the street now.
at the ice cream.
Before you guys go. Sidney Portier, I'm sorry, Mary Belafonte passed away. At 96.
Yeah, 96.
And we'll find
96
some way to
years old.
get you this.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Great
Well, I want
singer.
everybody to take a look
Great
at
singer.
this. Take a look at this. I said. I
God
said,
bless you, Dr. Dixon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
And you
your
too.
work.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you. I want everybody to take a look at this. At the top, it says African American Student Foundation, and you see the three men at the bottom. You see the date? 1959. How do we put this in time and space? It's after the Montgomery bus boycott, right around the time of the student sit-ins. So to understand this, those three men for about 10 years spent their hard-earned money and money that they collected to bring students from Africa to find them spaces across America to attend.
It's Harry Belafonte, Jackie Robinson, and Sidney Poitier.
November 10th, 1959. One of those young men went to the university, came from Kenya, went to the University of Hawaii, got married, had a son. Anybody have an idea? Barack Obama Sr. was a part of this program that eventually leads what? To the changing of history. Now let's look at this. This comes from, I have a very close friend that has a mobile museum. He has this particular piece, this artifact. So we were talking yesterday. I said, well, how much would you get for it? Now, I use this in class, right? Copies. I said, how much would you get for it? He said, probably about $175. Right? He has over $15,000. But I know he's not going to give it away. He'll make more money with him going out on the road with it. But him being a person who collects and things like that, that's against the guidelines. But everybody take a look at it. All three of these young men are no longer with us. But for you to have this piece, a connection to it, to understand what this piece is, if we don't have this program, we don't have Barack Obama as the president. I wanted everybody to have a takeaway. Did I give you one?
Yeah.
I wanted everyone to have a takeaway so that you can use this as you wish. Find a young person to have a conversation with. Then you'll ultimately be paying for your own rent right here on the planet. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.